In every age, God raises people up to speak the truth to the world in a way that is currently relevant. Though our opinions should not be held with the same esteem as the biblical canon, we still carry the hope of Christ to the world. Our society has forgotten what it means to follow Christ. The bright lights of truth seekers are barely visible in the dim twilight of a post-Judeo-Christian society. We all see the darkness coming. All we can hope is to share the light that He has entrusted to us. This is Modern Apocrypha. Hey, I'm Jared.
And I'm Greg.
And this is Modern Apocrypha, and we have a guest with us today. And we're going to be talking about something that's it's a bit different from what we normally hit. A lot of times we're talking about big picture stuff and how things affect everybody in the world and all of that sort of thing. And, you know, we've talked about how politics is kind of
periphery.
Well, and how it's kind of incentive captured, how it's really hard to make changes on a national level that matter at all. And the opposite is actually true on a state and local level. That is where things really matter, and where if we have things that are important to us, that's where they need to be addressed. And that's why Katie's with us today. And so, Katie, why don't you go ahead and tell us what's on your mind of late? Because Modern Apocrypha is a sort of a podcast about the things that are outside the Overton window that people don't really want to talk about most of the time. So what's up?
Yeah, something people don't really want to talk about. I have been watching what's going on with the Wyoming state legislature, and I just think it's important for people to know, to be aware of everything that's going on. It's kind of a big assumption that Wyoming is a conservative state, and you know, we kind of just go along and do our thing and don't really think about what's going on politically, especially in our state, because it's just an assumption. We're conservative, and it's an all Republican legislature, and you know, you don't even bother running if you're a Democrat, except in a couple of cities, the bigger cities, and that kind of thing, and even less than like a political affiliation. I think that people need to be aware of what is going on in the state and how it could impact them and their kids and their families. And we have a unique opportunity, maybe even more in Wyoming than in some places, to have an influence on politics and to have an influence on what's going on, because we do have a citizen legislature, and you can get in touch with our legislators and share your thoughts or what you want them. You can look up the legislation and say, hey, I want you to vote this way on this one. And you can't do that as readily in places that are bigger. The population just limits your access.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to say, is just that when it comes down to it, these people, because they are they don't have a lot of constituents, everyone who contacts them actually makes an impact. They listen way better than they do in more populous areas.
You would think, and there's seems to be a higher potential for that to be the case. Unfortunately, with my particular location in the state, I happen to have a very seasoned representative who doesn't seem to matter much what people say, or I mean, I've contacted him. I know people who have, and he's got his kind of practiced responses with any issues that are brought up. And it's frustrating, It's disappointing, and that's one of the things I've been just trying to bring awareness, especially to my area, because we're his constituents, and right now he's the Speaker of the House, and yeah, so that's been one of the most upsetting things.
So
Albert Summers is the
okay, I know the name. I know the name. So yeah, so for a little bit of background for people, when I was younger, I got involved in state politics a little bit as a citizen, and I knew the names of some of the legislators and such, and he's been around long enough that I still remember him 15, 20 years later, which should tell you something about how long he's been there. And maybe it's time for a change if people weren't asleep at
Well,
the
and that's
wheel.
the problem is for the first time in I didn't look up the history, but for the first time in several years, several election cycles, he actually had a couple of opponents this past year. And I went around and did some
Hmm.
campaigning for one of them and tried to tell people, "Hey, we've got these other people running. Here's how he tends to vote. You need to be aware." And oh, he's done good things for my family's in outfitting and he does good things for outfitters and oh, he's a lands rights guy and he runs on his name. And unfortunately, that tends to be the case
Yep.
with some of the more seasoned representatives, people in our legislature, is they have a reputation and people don't actually know how they vote. They just run based on the name they have established.
Well, and that's the case in politics everywhere. Go ahead, Greg. I don't mean to.
Well, I see that we've got a bit of a standard politics issue. We've got someone who's seasoned, as you say, that maybe is not listening to the quick change of technology as it's happening right now. And there's a lot of money and there's a lot of influence in what we call DEI. It's falling off a cliff quickly, but if he's slow to the uptake, he's slow to the change in that narrative. He may just be chasing some funding dollar, some money, uh, some program that he's not looking at it in a long term, what's going to affect our grandchildren in the law sort of way, because he knows that nobody presently is going to do stupid things here the way they do stupid things, say, in California.
And that's possible.
What is it that you're observing, Katie? I'm just saying. What is it that you see?
Well, for him particularly, so I looked at and have looked at this year, this legislative session. He's and the previous one, so last year's, he's in a position as Speaker of the House, and I don't think it's new. I was pretty upset when I found out about it, but I don't think it's new. There's a rule that I believe has just been kind of carried along that the Speaker of the House gets to decide what bills are even introduced and sent to committee for or considered for introduction. And so as I've looked through some of the bills that have been proposed for the last two legislative sessions, there are numbers of them that really need to be discussed. They're urgent issues for our children, for our state, and he hasn't even brought them up. And I mean, last year Harriet Hageman called him out on a couple of things, and there was somebody else that said you're blocking these issues, and he brings it back to, well, we need to maintain local control, which I don't disagree, but I think that the application of that looks different now than it did 20 years ago. Um,
Well, and I think that attacking someone on the any answer is an answer, log it, ask it again, log it, ask it again, and then when it comes time for the election, you can call him on his answers. He's trying everything he can to give no answer so that nobody can come back and say you said X, Y, or Z. If you said nothing, you can't blame him. And as long if you never pin him down on anything, then he'll always get away with that.
right.
Well, and then the other half of it, I think, is that you know right now, because of the way politics are at a national level, the more backbone we have at a state level, the more actually defined rules against bad things there are coming down from the national level. In a sense, the better off we are. So while local control is important, we also have to have some kind of breakwater against the tide coming in from the national side that is mostly just
Well,
negative.
so to give a little bit more of a fine point to it, because I agree with what you're saying,
Yeah.
the issues that I have been most concerned about just this last month or whatever, while I'm looking at these bills, are questions of gender transitioning and how we handle that mess with kids and
Yeah.
in schools and in the court system. And there have been bills that were proposed this session to address those, and he slides them under the rug. Like there parental rights protections and things like that that people bring up, and there were two bills. One of them was parental rights, and it was just a generic make everybody happy, like I voted for this, yay. And then the other one was a very pointed, if they're addressing gender questions in schools, if there are if they're asking kids about their preferences, and if they're, any kind of health issues that are addressed in schools, it was to specifically require them to tell parents, here's what we're doing, like beginning of the school year, here's what we're going to do, and lay it out. And that one, he did, like, it wasn't even introduced. So
I, I remember when we were young, I had the experience of both homeschooling and in class schooling. And when I was in class, they had to send home packets with the full semester's coursework so that the parents could see every image that was going to be shown, every title of a video that was going to be shown. I mean, it was a curriculum that was being presented to my mom, basically, because my dad was more off at work. But and my mom, like page by page, looked at every single thing and had to sign in more than one place. It's like one of those silly sign here and initial here and initial here and initial here, right? And you had to go through that for basic sex ed at, what was it, ninth grade, right? And now they want to put 5-year-olds in full on, very explicit.
And they are, in some states
directional.
they are, and that's why it hits close to home for me.
Well, and in the internet age, it's damaging because these things are being tagged. If you can think about the way that AI works, an image has 50,000 things that apply to that image, and it's tagged that way. So if this is tagged as children's learning somewhere, it could end up in front of your child accidentally. So it's a real dangerous place to go.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where I agree with local control. Like, we need to keep things local, but when it comes to education and it comes to the way that things are handled in the court system, if we address that with legislation and make a law, make a Wyoming statute, then it's not taking away local controls, because we already have invited a lot of influence from the federal level by accepting. Wyoming has accepted the Common Core curriculum. I don't know how much either of you know about that, but it's federally funded. And so in order to get this federal funding, you sign on to teach this particular curriculum. And by doing so, we have already invited federal controls. And so when I see these things happening, in other states, it's farther along. And to say we need to keep control local, well, no, if we've already given influence to at a federal level, we need to have established regulations at a state level so that it maintains local control.
And like you say, we have to protect people's right to do that. And so, just since we're here, what are the things that people, and this isn't just for people in Wyoming, we say that people in Wyoming have more impact, but this is for people everywhere. What are the things that you know of that people should be doing?
So in Wyoming, and I mean in any state, you can contact your legislators. And I know that's the case because we can contact them at a federal level too. So one of the easiest things and biggest things that I've been encouraging people to do right now is, during this legislative session for Wyoming, get in touch with your legislators. And I have a link that it's really easy to get on to the website for the state legislature, look up who your representatives are by location. They have phone numbers, email addresses. Just get in touch with them. And I have a list of bills that are, and like I can just looked up yesterday, what's the progress on these particular bills, and encourage them to support them, because I have a list of ones that were passed over, weren't even considered. I have the ones that I really wish had gone in, and then there's some that got killed already, but there are a few that people can get in touch and say, hey, vote for this, make it pass.
So I can include links in the show description, and if you send me links, I'll do that. If you have a specific list of things that you think are important that people ought to look at, do you have that in front of you?
That's part of the document that I emailed to you, that it has a list of the specific legislation. Those ones are all still active. So
do you have it in front of you? If so, can you read some of these names? Because I can't attach a document to the show notes, but I can do links.
So absolutely. I've got some specific pieces of legislation. So the ones that I was urging people to tell their legislators, vote yes on this. There's House Bill 92, which is protection of parental rights. It's a watered down version, but it still is trying to preserve parents' right to know what's going on, especially in the schools. HB, that's House Bill 148, is regulation of surgical abortions. Again, not a pointed kind of doesn't directly address the issue as much as I would like, but it's still it's on the right track. We're requiring locations that offer abortions to have certification, like actual practicing physicians and certification as a medical location, so you can't just have that happen anywhere. House Bill 125 is a repeal of gun-free zones and preemption amendments. So that is addressing our Second Amendment rights and
that would be a good thing.
Well, and Jeremy Haroldson was the one who introduced that bill. He's the sponsor for it, the main sponsor. It's the only one.
He's somebody who I knew. He's somebody who I knew way back in the day. He and I we grew up around the same time.
Yeah, and had some of the same experiences in politics early on. And
right. And now he's a state legislator.
And just like as a matter, like side note, that of the 6 or so bills that he proposed this session, that's the only one that was even introduced for consideration. Then Senate File 9 is Parental Rights in Education 1. Nope, that one was killed, sorry. Senate File, that was the one that would have been a much more direct way to address all of the gender stuff in schools and say parents need to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
But they killed that one. Senate File 99 is called Chloe's Law, Children Gender Change Prohibition. This one would actually make it illegal for gender change surgery and I believe chemical prescriptions. Yeah, any of that. For that to be illegal, physicians would be prohibited from providing that for minors.
Yeah, well, I mean, and these are things that should just be basic. Oh yeah, we're in Wyoming. This should have happened already. This should already be this should be a no-brainer. But obviously,
and the problem is, part of what brought this to my attention, and it was that issue specifically. There's a family in Montana who you may have read about in the news. Their teen was removed from their custody, and the issue is closely related to her desire she's expressed the desire to transition, and her parents were opposed to that, and so she was suicidal, and so they went in to investigate her suicide attempts, which weren't actually real, and in doing so found out that she wanted to transition and they were opposed to it. And it's hard to find very accurate information when you read about this, but I know that she was removed from their custody. I know that they specifically requested that she be kept in Montana because they have laws that are going to be going into place prohibiting gender change surgeries for minors, and they took her instead to a hospital in Wyoming for her initial care, and her parents were concerned about that because we don't have any laws to that effect.
Right. Well, and it's a valid concern. You know, we see this crap happening all over the world, all over the US, especially in places like Canada, and having it come here really is not far-fetched. We actually have to do what we can to make this not happen. And like I've said, local politics, state politics are the place where you can actually make a difference. And
people in Wyoming are in denial. When I did some more digging, I found that out and then did some more digging. There's currently a state statute in Wyoming that defines, for the sake of interscholastic activities, it defines gender identity as something that can be demonstrated by medical treatments or by a deeply held core value. So it's already in the statutes. It's not something that's trying to work its way in. Like, it's there and we need to get rid of it. And that the bill that was
Right.
proposed to eliminate that statute or to amend it, guess what? Didn't even get discussed.
Yeah, that, like you say, well, and like Greg said, not wanting to say anything but just doing the easy thing. That is sort of the hallmark of politics right now, is not rocking the boat so much that you actually upset people. And
Right. And you can appear to agree with everybody because you don't really say anything, and then which voice comes through the loudest? It's the one that's the most persistent. And that's why we need to be persistent. Those of us who want to preserve some of these freedoms, some of these biblical values, we need to be persistent and we need to be vocal, because the loudest people right now, it's not us.
Well, and I would say be persistent and be vocal, but be persistent and vocal in both directions. Be um, disgruntled and serious when things don't happen, but be jovial and be celebratory of the people that do say yes and get it done. Because too often, as libertarians, Republicans, Christians, we're just quiet. So when they do something great, well, they don't
And
even know.
that's very valid, because we don't tend to vocalize when we do approve of something. You're absolutely right.
well, and the people who actually spend their lives and their time and their efforts championing those things in a way that's effective do need to be supported, because it's a pretty lonely fight when you're fighting not just against the people who are out to destroy things, who are essentially part of the enemy's plan for what he's trying to accomplish in the world, but they're also against the system itself, which is basically set to just preserve the status quo or sort of let things change in the enemy's direction in a at a slower pace. When you're actually standing up against that, that is a lonely and difficult fight. And so yeah, you're right, we need to be supporting those people. um this is actually a good time for a break. You guys want to go to a break real quick and then we'll come back and
Yeah.
finish up?
I can always use more coffee.
All right, we'll be back in a minute.
Back in a minute.
Modern Apocrypha is brought to you by Bright Star, the forthcoming book by me, Jared Michaud, due to hit shelves April of 2024. For pre-release copies, head over to e6universe.com. Use the promo code Israel for 10% off with your order.
I'd like to take a moment to thank all the people enjoying Modern Apocrypha. As many of you can see, I'm an avid coffee drinker, and I've been drinking North Arrow coffee for a couple of pounds now. You can find North Arrow coffee at northarrowcoffee.co, all one word, where they list coffee of the month and how green coffee is handled. I've been enjoying some of the number 4 Honduras and some of the number 10 Peru, available at northarrow.co. If you'd like to help support us even more, you can use discount code E6 for 10% off your coffee order today. Thank you.
And we're back.
Welcome back, everyone.
So, what else did you want to hit here?
So, just to kind of clarify and sum up what has been on my mind lately and what I've been attempting, when all of the legislative stuff came to light for this session in Wyoming, I just try to put my thoughts together in a more concrete form so that I could share with other people. And one of the biggest things that is really important, when we look in scripture, we look at 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 2 is a verse that says, I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may all live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. It says it right there. The very first group that's discussed is kings and all those in authority.
It's interesting that you say it. Over the past few days, I've actually, this has got to be something that God is like trying to bring out for people right now, because over the past couple of days I've actually seen a couple of different people talking about exactly the same thing, where they're saying we need to be praying, whether it's because and actually that was what we talked about in the men's group the other night, saying we need to be praying because the reason we're not seeing the kind of salvations we used to, the reason we're not seeing the things that we need to see, is because people aren't praying the way they once did. And I think there's, when one person says it, I go, oh, that's, yeah, that's probably true. Two people say it and I go, well, that's interesting. And then I get it a third time and I'm like, okay, so there's something here that's actually important and we need to be paying attention. And I think you're right that we need to be praying for the people who are in places of authority. And that's especially for the people who are, what would I say, who are not following our agenda, who are not doing the things that we know are good and right. Because one way or another, they need to have God impact them in a way that
I
matters.
agree. And it's that is interesting that that came up with in men's group or anything else. Um because I when I as I continued that's the first verse and we're told to pray for them, but really to me it ties into something much bigger. Um because the powers and principalities, we wrestle against powers and principalities, and there are high things that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God, and those are really active in our country right now, maybe more than ever before. And they're really eager to work through and against people who hold positions of authority and leadership. And we need to pray for them. We need to pray for direction and guidance. We need to pray for protection for the ones that are out there fighting this battle and working to, for what's right. And that
Yeah.
that we need to pray that things that are done in secret would be revealed, and that God's purpose and plan would prevail. And I mean, even when Jesus taught his disciples to pray, it was, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And
And that says that it's currently not done on earth as it is in heaven, and that praying actually has an impact. That's what
yeah,
that example tells us. So I agree 100%. I think
yeah.
that's pretty critical.
So and
Um and yeah, go
just
ahead.
that going with more scripture in Matthew chapter 5, it's like 13 through 16, that talks about how we are salt and light, and it says that if salt loses its saltiness, what good is it? And if you don't build a city on a hill and then and or light a lamp and cover it with a basket. And if we're called to be salt and we're called to be light, then really that comes from being salty, and that means we're not going to be a pleasant taste for everybody that is around us. But when you stand up for what's right and you speak the truth and you stand with confidence on the word of God and in his strength, then that's really where you end up having an influence on people around you too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is, the other thing about salt that I think is interesting, and this is actually a point that I kind of belabor it, but I think it's important, is that it isn't about who is the big voice, who is the big name. It's about each and every one of us doing that regularly, faithfully, as we are able in whatever circumstances confront us, whether it's the people who surround you at a job, whether it's whatever it is. We have to be salt and light, and there are going to be costs associated with that. There are going to be um, it isn't an easy thing to do, but it is something we all have to do, and we can't just leave it to the people who have the big voices. That doesn't work.
Right. And because it isn't.
I've got I've got two things to say on the topic of Salt and light, and then the topic overall. Both salt and light are very interesting in the idea that you want them in a balanced amount. A good amount of salt is just the right. It's not too little where you can't taste it. It's not so much that it overpowers and it's all that you can taste. It is a flavoring that improves what's around it. It doesn't take over. And the same is true of light. Not enough light, you can't see anything. Too much light, you can't see anything. Just the right amount of light and everything is clear.
It's interesting you say that. We as Christians, as followers of Christ, I think to me what that means is that God has the right number of us and the right amount of us. It isn't about us limiting our effect or our reach. It's about God knows where we need to be and what we need to be doing, and we need to be faithful to that.
And then on the topic in general, I've heard as well from secular circles. Oh gosh, who's the gentleman that had the big discussion with Jordan Peterson about atheism versus religion?
I don't know.
Oh goodness, he's just full on that God's not possible and religion's terrible because it kills people.
Well, you're not talking Sam Harris, are you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
I'm terrible with names.
that's all right.
So in the general discussion group in that completely secular area, complete um, bowing down to the notion that prayer is important, specifically the statement, and I'm trying to get a quote. It's not exact, but it's close enough to what they said, that you may not believe in God, you may not believe in religion, but it believes in you. It's always a force around you. Every one of your favorite songs is quoting a scripture. I can show you 6 of your favorite songs that you thought was a hippie song that's really a Christian song. So, as you go through these things, like nature, you may not care that it's going to rain, but you still build a roof over your head. You still, whether you call it meditation or you call it prayer, you need to submit to a higher power or it will blow you over.
Well, and here's the other thing is when people talk about meditation and submitting to a higher power, you want to be careful what power you're submitting to, because you're not necessarily not
Well,
all roads lead to God. Not all
well,
roads lead to God.
that was in the discussion, is that you can't separate it. As soon as you get away from what I call a Judeo-Christian tradition,
Yeah.
then it's perverted into some terrible things immediately. So prayer is
Right.
prerequisite, and it works even if you know someone that doesn't know how to build a house. They still don't want to be left in the rain. If you can build a house, you can pray, right? You can help put up those walls. Then you can assist someone even if they don't know how to build that house themselves. Don't think that you don't have an effect.
True. And this sort of, what would I say? This sort of points back at the point that Jonathan Cahn made in his book, Return of the Gods, which is sort of that our culture, in embracing a godless ethic, in embracing a secular society, has sort of swept the house clean and left it open for the enemy to come in and inhabit the society, and to make to turn what used to be a Christian society into something that is worse than it ever was before. And that's,
Well, we see the evidence of that
I mean, what
happening.
do you even say?
That's what we can observe.
Yeah,
And
we do.
if we aren't active in praying, and if we don't stand up, then what would I say? You for a long time, for years and years in this country, you could kind of just be go to church if you felt like it, be relatively neutral, but there was an understanding, there was a general standard of this is how you treat people, this is how you contribute to society. I mean, that was the thing, to be a contributing member of society. There was a general understanding and an expectation of people and the way you live. Common courtesy, common decency, right? That isn't the case anymore because people don't realize those arise from that Judeo-Christian value system. Without that standard, there is no general standard of right and wrong. It's not. It's wrong. That it's very black and white in that right comes from God and otherwise it's wrong. And so as we have what you said, Jared, swept the house clean, we have left it open and now it's being inundated with other spiritual powers.
Other value systems and other
Yes.
powers.
And so
Yeah.
by being the people that God calls us to be and standing up and there's a lot of people that are left feeling pretty uncertain right now because we don't have that standard anymore. And as much as some people want to throw it out because then you're not accountable to anyone, you're free to make your own decisions, you don't have anybody to answer to. It leaves life in just a state of uncertainty, and that's not normal. It's not maybe not normal. It's not natural. It's not good for people. And it isn't comfortable. Ultimately, it's really not. And so whenever we stand on with confidence on biblical standards, on truth, then really we are pointing back to God, and it gives people hope.
Well, and that's something that we're, as a society, we're horribly lacking. I don't know if you've listened to the intro to this podcast, but what you're talking about is very much along those lines. So maybe you can listen to this episode later and you can hear that intro. But I absolutely agree with you. I think that's incredibly important. And my mission right now, what I'm doing, is along those same lines. People need hope. And I have a particular gifting, a particular set of abilities, and I'm trying to do what I can to give people hope through those. And I know Greg's doing the same. And Katie, you're a mom, and you've got all these other things you're doing, and it's a totally different set of things than what I'm doing. But you too are trying to do the same thing, and that is what we're saying that other people need to do. Is God gives you a set of responsibilities. Stand on the truth, speak the truth, be salt, be
In
light.
whatever.
What else do we
Yeah.
want to hit here,
Oh,
guys?
just agreeing
Go
with you,
ahead.
in whatever area you are, because we are all in very different walks, different areas, but all can, if our hope comes from God, and that's the only source for hope, then all of us are pointing back to Him in whatever we're doing.
I have a question before we leave. I know we're coming close to the end of this. What is our time frame? These are specific battlefields to be fought at specific times. You need to rally troops on the line at a time. What's our time frame? Right now we're at the very end of February. You're looking at gathering people to address the politicians in power, to vote them out at a particular time if it comes close. What are
Well,
your time
with the
frames?
legislation that I just talked about on the first half, the legislative session that we're currently in will be over on March. It's coming up. I mean, ending early March. And so all of these particular bills, um, if people want to talk to legislators about them now, because then this legislative session will be over in March.
Well, and sadly, by the time voting comes around, a lot of people have sort of forgotten what happened in the legislative session, and they're on to other things,
Yeah,
and
and so
then
maybe
nothing changes that
yeah, so
needs to
maybe
change.
taking notes, remembering, so that whenever election is coming around, being vocal about what you observed
Well,
during
it's a,
this legislative session, so that people have a more accurate picture of what is really going on and what these people, these individuals, politicians stand for, so that we can replace them, because otherwise they just rest on that reputation. So I will definitely be keeping my list of things that uh, were not introduced and bills and the way that people voted, and bringing that out whenever election comes around again. But for the moment, I mean, if anybody's going to contact Wyoming legislators, this session's almost over, so do it now.
What I can do, normally we would release one episode a week, but because this is sort of time critical, what I'll do is I will try to get this actually edited and put out day of, so that people can see it and you can share it. And you know, one of the things that I'd hope to accomplish here is if any of us know people who need to hear this, now you have, or we'll have a YouTube link, we'll have a Rumble link, we'll have an audio link. You can send it to people. You can have them listen to it. They don't have any excuse not to hear it if they need to hear it. So we'll try to do that too.
Sounds good.
Any final thoughts, Greg, or shall we call it here?
I think that's all from me.
Well, I appreciate the
Katie,
conversation and opportunity today.
all right. Well,
Thank you for coming to talk to us. Absolutely.
absolutely. Thanks for coming on. All right, everybody. Well, we will catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.